Welcome to this edition of Reporters here on France 24, the programme that brings you some of the best stories from our reporters around the world. Well, this week we take a closer look at victims of the US credit crunch. Around the world, stock markets have been tumbling as investor worry continues over the US lending crisis. But while the focus has been on Wall Street, millions of ordinary Americans are feeling the punch. They're the victims of risky housing loans known as subprime mortgages. These loans are made to people with poor credit histories, so they're high risk because the borrower may never be able to pay it back. And that's what's been happening. Changes on the US housing market means loans are now more expensive and prices are falling. Subprime mortgage holders are struggling to keep up repayments. In fact, many of them just can't. Homes are being repossessed, families evicted, and crime creeping in. Our reporter Sophie Claudet went to Cleveland, Ohio to see the human face of the global credit crisis.
It's a day like any other for these two bailiffs. Foreclosures have become a fact of life in Cleveland since the city was hit by the subprime crisis.
Any lights, any electricity in this joint? Yeah.
Everything that you see on the camera here, on the floor, the bags, everything's stove, refrigerator, all that stuff will come out.
Washer, dryer.
It's all personal items, it'll all come out.
The owners or the tenants have 24 hours to pick up their belongings, but most won't. They don't have the means to move the furniture. A few blocks away, yet another foreclosure. There will be 8 in this neighborhood alone today. And as is often the case, nobody's home. People live before being physically evicted. Some will stay with relatives. Others will rent a flat. Those less fortunate will join the ranks of Cleveland's ever-growing homeless population.
Sale number 25. Minimum bid $13,334. Do I have a bid? Bid. I have a bid of $13,334. Are there any other bids? Are there any other bids? Sold for minimum.
Every Monday, foreclosed houses are auctioned at the county sheriff's office. Most go for a ridiculous price and are typically bought by banks. But this man is here to speculate. He just bought a house for $30,000, around 20,000 euros, cash. He will do some repair work and try to resell it at a higher price.
One person's mishap, the other person's fortunes. You know, so it's a little sad, though, because I feel sorry for who's ever living in the house. I mean, I'm not going to put them out. I'm going to go and talk to them and give them time. I'm not going to just throw them out like, you know, what's happening now.
No less than 240 houses were auctioned off today. It's a high number, but that's not unusual these days.
Over the past 5 years, it has almost tripled. At the first time when we first did these sales, when I personally first did these sales about 7, 8 years ago, if we sold 80 a week, we thought we were doing a lot.
And what are the causes, you think, of this increased number of sales?
I think a lot of it is predatory lending and people overextending themselves. All of a sudden, one loses their job and then they lose a house. They buy houses they can't really afford. It's okay when they're both working, or a divorce. But basically, I would say predatory lending. People just don't read the fine print.
Barbara Anderson moved to Slavic Village 25 years ago. This neighborhood has since become America's foreclosure capital. Back when she settled here, Slavic Village exclusively housed white immigrants, mostly from Poland. She says she and her family became victim of racial harassment. The back of the house was set on fire several times until one day her insurance company said it would no longer pay for repairs. That's when she was talked into contracting a subprime loan, but Barbara did not read the fine print.
We didn't realize in the beginning that our interest rate each time was going up. We thought that whatever papers we originally signed, that those would be the papers that would carry through and there would be no change. But there were some significant changes with each servicer that we were flipped And I think that's the term that everybody used, that we were flipped to.
Unlike many others in Slavic Village, Barbara Anderson was able to save a house. But at what price? She did manage to convince a more reputable bank to buy off a subprime and restructure it into a fixed-rate loan. In exchange, she contracted a new loan for an additional 30 years. When she's done repaying her debt, Barbara will have paid 5 times the original price of a house.
Can't help but be angry because, especially, my husband worked hard to take care of this house. He worked hard and went through a lot to just live here. And to know that at his death, that we were still even further behind than when we originally started, I mean, it's heartbreaking for him and it's heartbreaking for me.
In Cleveland, the county's treasurer has been making noise for years in the hope the federal government will acknowledge the human and financial tragedy that has hit his city. Jim Rokakis points to the magnitude of foreclosures since the year 2000. Each red dot represents a vacant house.
Let me go back to 2000. If you had less than perfect credit, you were enticed into this game because for the first time you had a chance to buy a home. Not only did they buy one home, many people for the first time were buying not 1 but 2 and 4 and 5 and 10 properties. Why? Because this company was looking the other way, right? Was willing to give them a loan with no down payment because an appraiser lied about the value of the house. The mortgage broker was making money. He didn't care. So, but you typically targeted the poor. You don't find many people in upper income neighborhoods falling victim to this. They're smart. I mean, they're smarter about financial matters. They weren't going to get into a loan they couldn't afford. Here was a $26,000 home, $26,800. The loan was for $73,800, 275% of market value.
A massive fraud, as these numbers show.
But as I've come to learn in this country, nobody pays attention when cities like Cleveland are bleeding. But when there's blood on Wall Street, everybody's paying attention. And that's really what this is about. We've been complaining about this since 2000. I mean, by 2000, we were already leading the country in foreclosures. We asked for help. We went to the Federal Reserve Bank. There have been laws passed. Nobody really paid attention to this crisis until it spread to Wall Street.
The subprime crisis has afflicted thousands of borrowers like Barbara Anderson, but it has also changed the face of Cleveland. Entire neighborhoods have been deserted, houses abandoned and looted, like here in Slavic Village. No less than 800 houses are vacant in this part of town, which has become a gathering place for drug dealers and gangs. An old man and a young girl lost their lives this year to the war of gangs. Police don't have enough staff to patrol in this neighborhood. Residents were forced to take security into their own hands. Barbara Anderson and her neighbors founded a club. Together, they make the rounds, looking for abandoned houses and for any suspicious activity they report to the police. The club tries to recruit youth to look after the neighborhood. We're now invited to visit a house that was badly looted.
Once the house becomes vacant and abandoned and vandalized, then it sets up a whole new host of problems. Not as the problem now is what to do with that vacant and abandoned property. It becomes a nuisance, certainly bringing down the value of houses all around it. It certainly becomes a health and safety hazard. And we see where people who are maybe using drugs or on drugs use it as a haven. It also becomes, like this particular piece of property, open, vacant, and now abandoned. Stripped of its copper, stripped of its plumbing, stripped of any aluminum siding would be on it, stripped of furnaces, and just one thing right after another, the house becomes totally gutted.
Joseph Hughes takes us upstairs where the looters plundered the walls and the baseboards.
This house has been like this for about 6 years. About 6 years now.
And so the chances that it will be sold are nil, right?
No, it will not be sold. What will happen is the city will acquire the property. They will virtually tear it down. When you look out the front, this vacant lot once contained a house.
According to him, the house next to the empty lot will soon be destroyed, if the municipality can afford it, that is.
When you have 2 policemen trying to apprehend 4 or 5 kids in an abandoned house, That's two policemen that can't respond to a more important call, such as a shooting or a drive-by shooting or a hit and run. So it has to be put in a category, and that category puts it at the lower run, you see, because of it. You simply don't have enough police officers to combat what's going on.
Local authorities unable to tackle the security, financial and human tragedy that has hit Slavic Village, and residents have somehow accepted that. Here, graffiti warned that this house has already been stripped of copper.
My name is Barbara Anderson.
Further down the street, Barbara Anderson suspects that this house may be a squat. She climbs the stairs and engages the young woman sitting on the front porch. Visibly embarrassed, the girl insists she doesn't live here.
You look so young. I thought if you were youth, you might want to get involved with something.
On Sunday morning, we're invited to yet another club gathering in Slavic Village. There, we meet up with Tony Brancatelli, the local councilman. People discuss various neighborhood issues, but foreclosures are on everybody's minds. Tony Brancatelli gives them an update about bills being discussed in Washington that could help people facing foreclosures.
What we're asking for is to pass federal legislation that says if you file bankruptcy, you have the right to go negotiate with the current mortgage holder for a more appropriate mortgage. And that's getting out of those 9 and 10% adjustable rate mortgages and getting into fixed rate mortgages. And in some cases, that's lowering the value of the mortgage.
This woman worries about squatters settling in the vacant house next to hers. Brancatelli points out that companies responsible for extending predatory loans are starting to pay for their wrongdoing.
The front page of the Plain clearly shows more folks being arrested. And we can't be any happier than to see that happen. Those are the best stories we can see. An appraiser going to jail, a title company going to jail, a mortgage broker going to jail is the only way that we're going to stop this trend, because so long as people are allowed to borrow money unfettered, that no one's going to question it because it's being financed out of some out-of-state company, those folks have to go to jail in order for this to stop.
Right. The world has just started to fathom the financial and human drama generated by subprime loans, but Cleveland has already paid a hefty price, and it's not even over yet. The subprime crisis should reach its peak in 2008. Until then, Cleveland will have to continue to hope for better laws. Mostly, its residents will have to rely on their own patience and resilience to try and pull through.
Well, our reporter Sophie Claudet joins me in the studio now. Sophie, what your report really seemed to illustrate is that this crisis isn't something new, it's something that's been going on for some years now.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as you can see, the main character, Barbara Anderson, was first approached with a subprime loan back in 1996. So that's, 11 years ago? And the treasurer of the county started, ringing the alarm bell, as it were, back in 2000, when the city of Cleveland was already leading nationwide in terms of foreclosures. So yeah, it's an old problem. But it took until Wall Street started to bleed, to paraphrase Roukakis, the treasurer, until the world, or part of the world, or we certainly, took an interest into Cleveland.
Now, many of the victims of these subprime mortgages are already some of America's poorest people, aren't they? Do you think that in some ways the lenders specifically targeted them?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there have been some studies showing that they were targeted. Some of them were, and those subprimes, it's a subdivision, if you will, of subprimes called predatory lending. And so there have been some studies showing that these people were targeted, and there is a strong correlation between the color of the skin and their economic background. And I mean by that, a lot of African Americans and Hispanics fell victim to these subprimes, and knowingly so on the part of the mortgage brokers.
Well, do you think the borrowers could have taken more personal responsibility? After all, they took out mortgages, and many of them must have known they didn't have the money to pay back.
That's right. I mean, there is at some level a kind of individual responsibility, as you well said. But you have to bear in mind that, for the first time, these people could afford a house. were able to purchase a house and be homeowners, which was unthinkable before. So some of them were carried away. Some of them actually played a dirty game. I mean, there's no lying about that. Some speculated, and flipped those houses and resold them at a higher price and so on. So yeah, you have to distinguish between people that were really fooled and people that actually played a dirty game. And you're right, some people did not read the fine print. I mean, that's well shown in the story. And even Barbara Anderson, who in the end managed to keep a house because she's very strong-willed, and she actually, I couldn't show that in the story, it's only 13 minutes, but she actually joined an NGO with other people to fight against subprimes and to try to recover a house. But she also could have been more cautious. And she told us off camera that, maybe she was not, cautious enough, but she was so happy when for the first time she was able to purchase a home. But she's also, I mean, a lot of these people are working people, and it's working class. I mean, it's not like, people living on credit only and stuff. I mean, it's a mixed bag of people, as it were, and some of them were fools, some of them, didn't play by the rules, but everybody's paying for it by now. I mean, that's the bottom line is like everybody and anybody's paying for it, and everybody bears a responsibility in this crisis.
Sophie Claudier, thank you very much for that fascinating insight into the human face of the US lending crisis. And that's all we have for this week, for this edition of Reporters. Do join us, though, next week for another report from somewhere in the world, from one of our correspondents.